Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to do another special selection today, which is where you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. If you have your own song you'd like to submit for special selections, you can find a link to do so in the description below. Today's request comes at us from Isaac. After your Clark video, I'm interested to see what you think of another longtime artist from Warp Records. Autechre came out of the UK rave scene and have become one of the most introspective and interesting electronica, glitch, IDM, whatever term you want to use, artist out there. Part musician, part sound designer, part software developer, and part architects. That may or may not make any sense upon listening. Enjoy Autechre 11, which is from their 2013 XI album. So, let's jump into this. I'm kind of a little curious about why we have QR code looking image here. Also, it might just be like a sprite with a gray back. I don't know. I honestly have no idea what I'm in for here other than that it's electronica. So, let's dive into this and see what's going on. It's very otherworldly, which I think is the most unique aspect of it. Everything from the production to just the formation of the sounds, the attacks, really everything about it just seems so foreign. growing increasingly difficult for me to focus on what's happening. It's the weirdest thing. It's like bending light around an object, but bending sounds. It's a tempo shift, isn't it? It becomes increasingly difficult to figure out what they're doing. Some really neat, really tight reverb. Just the way that it's too dynamic. I think that's the thing, or it's extremely dynamic, I think is a better way to word that. Even these notes aren't the note, they sort of slide in and slide out of that chord pitch that they are given. There are songs, there is music that you guys present to me at times that really pushes my understanding of the horizons of the art of sound. This is one of them. This is either going to be an incredibly short or an incredibly long video, entirely dependent on how the stream of consciousness goes, because right now I have no grasp of what just went on there. I mean, I kind of understand the process that went into it, but as far as the song itself, what? So, where do we start, man? let's start with me. A little unusual here. Typically, are a bit more objective about things and look at what the song is doing. But instead, right now, I want to look at how I felt listening to the song because I think that is what's going to color this entire analysis here. My brain had no idea how to take any of this. In fact, the first 30 or 40 seconds, I began to feel nauseous. Uh, and this is the second time I think on the channel that production has done that. The other time was some Smashing Pumpkins track. I don't remember what the song was called, but the production on it and the placement of instruments made me nauseous. And I don't think I quite understood why there, but I think it kind of has to do with. Okay, so follow me on this. There's going to be a lot of weird connections I make on this one. That's just how my brain works. Um, I already talked about bending sound earlier, right? So it's going to be a weird one. Buckle up. Uh, so motion sickness, right? It can happen when you're, in a car or an amusement park ride. More recently, with new technology, we have VR sickness, but it kind of ties into a lot of the same things. It is a discrepant. Well, it's a discrepancy between this little equilibrium thing you got right here behind the ear. I don't know what it's called. Um, as far as I understand it, in very layman's terms, I'm not going to say that I have a strong understanding of what this thing does, but it's sort of like a gyroscope and accelerometer for your body. It kind of measures movements and velocity and orientation, I believe. Um, and it's some fluid that just kind of sits behind your ear, and your brain can interpret it. Maybe it sends signals. I don't know. Um, and it's clashing with your other senses, right? So, um, if you're moving very quickly, or but you can't, or it looks like you're moving slowly while you are moving quickly, or maybe you're moving quickly but there's no breeze going through your body, right? You don't have that physical sensation of movement, and that's where some ideas can clash, right? This little equilibrium thing says, hey, we're moving pretty fast, but your eyes are like, I don't think so, or it feels pretty slow. What's the body saying? And your skin's like, I don't feel much of a breeze, I don't know if we're actually moving too fast. And your brain takes these mixed signals and occasionally can put it together and say, I think we're under the influence of something. Let's vomit." And like I said, this is very reductive. It's probably not a very thorough investigation into motion sickness and VR sickness and stuff like that. Even general video games. I know a few people who can't play video games from the first person perspective because of this. They get really nauseous about it. Um, or any fast camera work in films or video games, anything like that. It's the movement that disagrees with what the body's experiencing. Um, Now, take that to an auditory level, right? My ears are so used to hearing specific kinds of sounds, specific kinds of dynamic work, specific. It's not the notes or the timbre of the notes. We've listened to some electronic music with some very strange sounds to them. Off the top of my head, I Speak. We checked out on a live stream once, and we've also listened to what was that composer that I likened? It was like a super long Jebsen. I don't know if that's accurate. It was like this super long title that looked like just math symbols, just a bunch of gibberish. And I likened it to a hyper minimalistic piece that felt like being in the middle of a lawnmower that wouldn't start. lots of really weird sounds in there. It's not the sounds. Just like when we listened to that Smashing Pumpkins track, it wasn't the sounds. The guitars, the bass, the drums, the vocals, they were all pretty typical. It's the production of all of it that is off. It's alien. It's different. It's so foreign to me that I think my brain is having that same reaction of I can't interpret what the ear is sending me, and that's not normal. So maybe we should just vomit. And I think that's what's happening in these songs, where not the I don't I think a couple of especially fans of Smashing Pumpkins kind of took that the wrong way when I mentioned it in that video that the song made me nauseous. It's not the music that was like it, it's so bad it makes me sick kind of thing. No, it's like something about the production that actually caused me to feel nauseous. It made me feel like I needed to throw up. And it's happening here, and I don't want it to be viewed as an indication of how I feel about the music. It's just such a foreign sound that the only thing I could think is my brain thinks I'm on drugs and I need to vomit, there's something toxic in my body it needs to get rid of, because normally it can understand what's coming in, the signals coming in through the ear. And here it's like, no, this is gibberish. Something's messed up with the ear. Something must be wrong with the body. It's a very strange feeling to listen to a song that makes me feel sick. Doesn't make me sick, right? I'm not upset with the track. I don't think it's trash or anything like that. I'm just physically becoming ill listening to this production. And even that kind of makes it sound negative, but it isn't. It's just a very strange, different sounding production. So that's kind of where I was at this entire time. And I got over it. My stomach still feels kind of cold. I can feel it in my gut that it's still like on the verge, like, hey, Bryan, are we doing this? Um, but then mixing that with me trying to apply my music theory to this, right? Coming at it from, as many different angles as I can. I'm becoming more well versed in rock and metal theory. I have a background in classical theory and some jazz theory. So I'm trying to apply all these different compositional structures to this to make sense of it, and it's defying a lot of it, right? And this is not atypical for these not even boundary art pushing, horizon pushing, just really doing new things. I tend to have a difficult time speaking about them because they're so different than what I'm used to. Um, so, like I said, it's not abnormal for me to have a tough time trying to put into words what's going on here. But that was my entire experience, was kind of feeling a little nauseous and then being really confused about what's going on and trying to figure all of that out. But here is the best analysis I've got. Okay, so what is going on here? I want to start with the production, because I think that's more important than what anything else is doing, and I don't want to forget it. Uh, what the music is doing and what tones are selected, uh, they're they're all very simple. The tones are really intense in a lot of places, and there's a lot of really unique characteristics in them. But aside from them just sounding interesting, they also do sound very techno-y, at least from someone who doesn't listen to a lot. So I might not be picking up on the nuance of the tones themselves, but they have crafted some really neat sounds that sometimes even have acoustic analog. And then the music is just, it's kind of basic music. Yeah, a lot of atmospheric stuff, simple repeated melodies, and simple rhythms that tend to accentuate downbeats. It really is the production that, at least to me, sets this strongly apart from almost anything else I've listened to. And if I can remember some of the musical things, we'll touch back on it later. But like I said, I really want to get this production stuff out while it's still fresh in my head. So the production is amorphous. It, to me, feels highly unstable. It is just the most dynamic thing I've ever heard, which should be a positive. I don't think I've ever talked about having too much dynamic quality in a track. I'm a huge fan of dynamics, whether it's layers or voices or volume or tempos or time signatures. The more changes, the more interested I'm going to get. I mean, I guess technically there's always been that invisible cutoff that I've just never reached. Of course, too much of something is always going to be bad. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing. Um, but I don't think I've ever heard anything that would kind of give me that point of too far. I don't know where the line is drawn. This is definitely to me the very huge extreme end. I do think we can walk it back and it still might be too much for me. And there is certainly a line that I'm going to enjoy where it moves from dynamic quality that interests me to dynamic quality that pushes me away. It rubs me the wrong way. And this certainly sits on the other side. There's just so much movement to everything. I mean, we can even look at a sort of physical movement, spatial placement. So many of the instruments, especially in the opening half of the track, are just bouncing around left and right and forward and backward, which is still massively impressive to me because I don't understand how to do the Z-axis placement. X-axis is easy. That's panning channels. Left channel, right channel, and if you have 0% on both of them, you get center channel. Y-axis placement to me is sort of pitch and volume combined. I'm sure there's some EQing in there that can help it kind of elevate above the rest of the band or below the band. But I tend to find decent success out of just modifying volume and pitch to really, put voices in specific y-axis placements, but z-axis makes no sense to me. That is distance in front of me and behind me, and I've talked about sounds that felt like they were going behind me or were placed a bit behind me, um, or sounds that feel a bit distant. It isn't like this is the first time I'm hearing this, but I'm hearing it with massive sweeping changes constantly. Um, And it boggles my mind because one, I don't understand how to do it. I don't know how to make things sound far away. Part of that is just me coming to production so late. I've only been mixing and producing music of my own for like a year now. Prior to that, it's all been, MIDI through notation software, my bread and butter. I learned how to make music in notation. Um, in hindsight, I probably should have spent some time with audio engineering back in university, but I didn't. I didn't think I was going to need that skill because I was pretty confident I'd just be a strong composer and performance and recording would be somebody else's job. Well, things didn't pan out that way. Now I got to learn it. But yeah, so I don't have that skill. So that's kind of wizardry to me, but it sounds foreigner, not like foreigner. It just sounds more foreign because it's constantly in flux everywhere. It's high and to the right and low and to the left, and sometimes far away in front of me and sometimes far away behind me, and sometimes it's very right next to my ears, and it's just moving everywhere. It's all places at one time, kind of, where it's really difficult to really place where it is because of the infinite amount of placements any note could be in, and that's just for one instrument. But there's multiple instruments, at least in this opening half of the track, that are doing this same thing. There's so much to keep track of. Like I mentioned, the notes are simple. It's a series of like 6 or 7 notes in a 1 or 2 bar phrase that repeats ad nauseum for 4 minutes. It's nothing super complex on paper, but when you look at the production side of it and how there's so many moving ideas all fluctuating around the sound sphere, it becomes a lot to take in. And that's just the beginning. There's vocal dynamics, so many sounds fade in and fade out in the middle of ideas, and it's not always the same place in all the ideas. Take, for instance, I don't know if this is exactly what's happening, but imagine you have a 4 beat phrase with a 5 beat automated volume slider. So we might fade in on beat 1, hit our peak on beat 3, and fade out on beat 1 and fade back in on beat 2. So the fade in is on a different note than it was the first time around, and we'll constantly have this 1 beat displacement until it starts on beat 2, beat 3, beat 4, and lines back up starting on beat 1. Again, we now have a 4 bar phrase out of a 1 bar musical phrase, because when we take into account of our volume, we have a shifting melodic idea. Now, do that on a more complex level. Maybe it's a 9 bar fade on a 4 bar idea. And maybe the second melody line has a 5 bar idea with a 3 bar fade, or 5 beat idea with a 3 beat fade. So it's going to attack or it's going to have its volume peak and our volume floor in the middle of our idea. And it can just create a lot of, I don't want to say confusion, but a lot of variety that makes the pattern difficult to find while also just feeling like everything is constantly moving. I sometimes like to use visual metaphors because I feel like visuals are easier to relay. Audio things Audio is just an entirely different beast. I think it's a really strange thing to talk about, especially since I feel like I don't have super unique interpretations of music that I hear. I wouldn't say that I hear music in color or numbers or anything like that. I think I hear music as music, but there's also clear, especially in the comments and me talking to non-music people like my family and friends and stuff like that, that I hear music differently than your average person. It may not be super unique, but it is a different way of hearing. So I like to liken it back to visuals because I feel like visuals are a lot easier to um, for people to pick up on. Um, and what this kind of feels like to me auditorily, what the image I pick up is, uh, multiple, like a crowd of people in front of you, and every person sort of fades in and fades out of opacity. You can see them, and then you can't see them. You can see them. Now imagine that everybody had a different pulse. Some people might flicker in and out every half of a second. Some people might take a full second to flicker in and out, and some people might take half of a minute. And so it becomes this chaotic array of kind of people coming into and out of visual existence. And that's what this music sounds like to me. It is just a lot of noise without much of a pattern that goes along with it. And I don't mean noise like sound noise. I say noise like a lot of information, right? Trying to take in a lot of information, and it gets jarbled up into noise. It's very difficult to pick apart what all of the signals mean in my brain to make sense of it all. And that's what I mean when I say noise. It's just a lot of information that doesn't stay separate. A lot of the time we say, oh, this is what the guitar was doing, this is what the drums were doing, this is what the vocals were doing, and then later I can recall all that information. And here it's an onslaught of auditory information being put into the brain. Um, and it's wild. And is that even all of it? Spatial, volume, Oh, and pitch. There's actually a part in the second half of the track. It was with that string sound, like a plucked string. Uh, I almost feel like there's some automated modulation on the pitch for all of those notes because every note was sort of s- slurred into and also just kind of wavy in itself. So instead of bum bum bum, it would be like and you get like these volume fluctuations where it kind of rises into the note, and then when you hit the intended note, the volume fades out until we get to our next intended note where it fades up. So you get the ba ba ba, but it's emphasized not through articulation, which is the way you attack. Ba ba ba, get those hard stops and starts for each note. We slur into all of them, but we still get an emphasis on the core note through the volume rises. Wah wah wah, right? So we get kind of this idea going on where we're constantly like always transitioning into another note. It's very difficult to ever say that this is the key note because we're there for a fraction of a second, which is no different than we are of any other individual microtone between it and the pitch we came from or the pitch we're going to. Um, but yeah, so that's it. We have volume fluctuation and pitch fluctuation going on there, as well as the huge volume fluctuations we get with the fade ins and the fade outs, and then the spatial fluctuation. It reminds me of like some bad CGI from 2000s, early 2000s, where it'd be like this metallic fluid orb where like it would create spikes and like hills out of it. And you could tell it just looked like super fake. I mean, maybe at the time we were really impressed by it, but nowadays it just looks super fake. But it's this ball that doesn't want to be a ball. It's a sphere that doesn't want to be a sphere. It wants to be anything else, and it tries to be everything else. It is constantly in flux. Sometimes we even see an edge of a square come out and then fold back into the sphere. And that's what this feels like. It's trying to be anything other than what it is. And through that, it becomes something that, as I said earlier on in the reaction, I find very difficult to focus on at all. It's basically, I made the allusion to bending light, of utilizing a visual component to hide something visual within a visual component, if that makes any sense. In a lot of sci-fi, we have active camouflage where you bend the light around the object and thus they look invisible. And that's kind of where I was going with this, where like I really want to hear the song underneath it, but there's so many auditory components that push my mind around the notes and drag them out in other places where I'm picking up the wrong information and I'm missing what is clearly here. I just can't hear it. Every bit of the song actively pulls my attention away from what I'm trying to hear. Um, and that's, I kind of hope that works because it was one of the first things I thought of when we got to that second section. And I was like, man, I really want to hear what's on the paper here, but the song doesn't want to let me. Like, this is kind of like active camouflage. And I brought up the idea of bending light in the reaction. I was like, I don't have time to explain this. I hope people get it, or worst case scenario, I hope I remember to pick back up on this later. Because it's just, yeah, it's a bizarre thing to experience. When you know something's there and you can kind of hear that it's off, but your brain just refuses to let you hear it for some reason. I don't know. Really weird stuff. Instrumentation. Like I just said earlier, that there's a couple instruments in here that even have acoustic analogs, and that's one of them. There at the end, the one that sounds like a string instrument, a plucked string. Um, Almost like a harp, but sharper. Uh, I don't know how to emphasize it. It might be something to do with the material the strings are made out of, the tightness of the strings, although that's going to influence pitch. I don't know. There's something about these, and it could entirely be on the production side. It sounds like a harp if the harp were just a bit more abrasive of a timbre. Um, and it's interesting because a lot of the stuff we heard throughout, I'm like, wow, this is all, I'm gonna say synth based, right? Everything's sort of based off of the key waveforms, the sine wave and the saw wave and the square wave or whatever. Everything has a very distinct electronic sound. We get into the second half though, and we have a string instrument. Really interesting placement in there. It feels like it really wants to add a bit of humanity or earthiness to the track, but it kind of doesn't because it's just distorted enough into that electronic space that it's almost like Uncanny Valley for audio. Like I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool. We have an acoustic instrument in here, and like something sounds. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know what about it tells me that it's not an acoustic harp being played by a human and that there's something digital about it, but it's definitely off. It's something I immediately hear. Um, it just really this whole track is interesting because I have all of these visual analogs for my entire experience, and that's not typical. This is a song that put a lot of images in my brain, and for that I'm very intrigued. um, I mean that might be it. I don't have any overarching themes to pick up. I don't have a story to be told through all this. It honestly sounds like a lot of sound to me, which is, I know that kind of feels a bit reductive. It might even feel a bit, what is it when you can just discard something, just kind of push it aside and not have to think about it. But that's not what I mean when I say it just sounds like a bunch of sound. I don't have the vocabulary or the experience with this to properly articulate exactly what's going on here. It's a lot of stuff that I'm inexperienced with. And I really appreciate it being brought to my attention because of that. One of the best things that I think this channel has done for me is expand my horizons of music, not just in experiencing it but understanding it. There's so many genres that's dismissed. I don't want to just be able to dismiss it by saying that it's a lot of sound. That's the word I was looking for earlier. There's a lot of genres that either I have dismissed earlier in my life as just something I wouldn't get or don't like, um, or even if you go a bit younger, that I say is just terrible music. And even if you look at the beginning of this channel's life, I did have a little bit of I had a few pretentious thoughts here and there about what is good music. But I've learned to open up a little bit, right? And I've come to not only just appreciate but even understand a lot of music genres that I didn't 2 years ago. And even if I don't love them, I still have a much better appreciation for them. And all of that is because you guys continue to find stuff that push me out of my boundaries. That was a lot easier at the beginning when all you had to do was give me a black metal track, and I'm like, whoa, I'm out of my depths here. Nowadays, you really got to find something a bit more obtuse, and this is certainly that. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on Autechre 1-1 is. Um, this is where you guys come in. Let me know what's going on in your brains, what you guys thought of this, if there's anything that stood out to you or anything you'd like to add on to what I said, or help me out in understanding what's going on here. If there is anything to understand, it might just be a really cool electro song with not much, not much to really add other than these guys being uh, super groundbreaking with their production styles. If that's the case, though, that's still an amazing achievement. Like I said, I've never heard anything like this, and that is kind of huge. When you're done commenting, you head into the description box, and Find the link for Linktree that takes you to this menu right here. It has everything related to the channel. You can pick up merch, follow me on Twitter, join a Discord community, support the channel through Patreon, submit your own special selections, email me, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. We'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we're going to check out our penultimate emo track and our final special selection for the week. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to. Have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.